Welcome to Busting the Myths of Mindfulness with me, Laura Evans. There are lots and lots of myths and misconceptions around what mindfulness actually is and around mindfulness and meditation. So this video and the next two is aimed at really helping you to understand what mindfulness is and to break down any perhaps resistance or barriers that you might have got to developing a mindfulness practice and understanding how a mindfulness practice can help you in your life. So quite simply, mindfulness is the art of using your senses to be fully awake in the present moment. So you might have noticed that most of your stress comes from worrying about the past or fearing the future. So quite often our attention is going over and over memories, things that have happened yesterday, last week, or even way back in the past, or worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow, later on in the day, next month, next week, next year even. And for lots of us, nothing provokes this response more than grief. Now, there are many, many reasons in life why we grieve. We don't just grieve when a loved one dies. We grieve when there's any end or changes in our lives. And often what I was seeing is that many people who were coming to a mindfulness for stress course and feeling like that they were stressed, actually, when we sort of dug deeper into it, they were actually suffering from some form of grief or loss. Now, the problem is, few of us are taught to cope with day-to-day stress in our lives, much less grief. Grief and stress themselves are not actually mental health problems. They are normal and natural reactions to life situations. But the problem is we don't get taught how to deal with them. But fortunately, all of us can learn how to turn the stress switch to off, even during the most troubling of times. So even when things are really, really stressful, we can still manage our stress well and be able to get through, those challenging times. And many people, if you've heard of mindfulness, you will know that it has its roots in Buddhism, but you don't need to be a Buddhist or have a background in mindfulness meditation or yoga, be physically fit, or subscribe to any particular set of spiritual beliefs to benefit from mindfulness. Every single person can benefit from mindfulness, from the very, very young to the very, very old, and anywhere in between. The only thing that you need to approach your stress or your grief or whatever it is you are dealing with mindfully is yourself, just as you are right now. The fact that you are listening to this video shows that you've got hope for your ability to weather whatever storm it is that you are going through, or whatever stresses or grief or loss or anxieties, whatever it is that you are dealing with right now. If you didn't have hope for your ability to learn how to get through it, you wouldn't be listening to this video in the first place. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how mindfulness techniques can help you then. So mindfulness techniques can help to ease the physical symptoms of stress, anxiety, grief and loss. And it's quite an eye-opener when you learn just how many physical symptoms there are to stress, anxiety and grief and loss. And what goes on in our mind shows up in our body somewhere, and shows up in our body in things like racing heart, aches and pains, all of those sorts of things. And if you have already gone through the Rock Through Life Survival Guide, you will have learned quite a lot about the physical symptoms to stress. If you haven't gone through the Rock Through Life Survival Guide, then I suggest this might be a good point to go back and look at the session around the connection between the mind and the body and learn about all of those physical symptoms. Mindfulness techniques can help you to calm your mind and help you to regulate difficult emotions. So if you are in a really sort of stressful situation and you're feeling anxious, feeling stressed, mindfulness techniques can help you to calm the body, calm your mind, and to calm your emotions. They can help you to improve your awareness of the present moment. And what that helps us to do is, instead of just reacting to something, we can choose how to respond in better ways that are much more helpful for us. And much more helpful because quite often, when we just react to situations, often we take it out on the people that are closest to us, don't we? and it can lead to, real problems in relationships. Whereas instead of just reacting to things, if you can learn to notice what's going on, calm down your emotional system, calm down the bodily reactions, then instead of that automatic reaction, like sort of biting somebody's head off or being really impatient with somebody or being sort of offhand, you can respond in better ways, and it's going to have a much better impact on your relationships. Mindfulness techniques can massively increase your compassion towards yourself and other people, and often people resist being compassionate to themselves because they feel like it's selfish. And actually, being self-compassionate makes us have more capacity to be compassionate to other people. Mindfulness can help us to manage unhelpful thinking patterns. And in mindfulness, you learn lots of techniques to be able to manage thoughts, the usual everyday thoughts and those that come with a charged emotion as well. It can help you to develop a new narrative rather than believe in old limiting beliefs. So in mindfulness, we learn to pay attention to what our thoughts are, and often we discover that there are patterns to our thoughts, and often the narrative that we've got are often quite self-critical thoughts that lead to be limiting beliefs, and limiting beliefs are thoughts that we come to believe that really hold us back in life. So what we can learn to do is to be able to notice what that narrative is and then be able to change them. So instead of them holding us back, then we can move those limiting beliefs out of the way so we can flourish and grow. And mindfulness, lots of people come to mindfulness because they are struggling with stress or anxiety, depression or chronic pain, or trying to manage a health condition. But actually, even if your life is okay and you're not really sort of like suffering with anything in particular, mindfulness can also help you to find joy in your life and to be the happiest you can be. So it's not all about managing difficulties. Mindfulness can just help you to be a happier human being. And who doesn't want to be as happy as they possibly can be? So the good news is, I suppose, that many people do learn to manage stress well. Many people do learn to survive grief and loss and anxieties and depression. And quite often, when you come through difficulties like grief and loss or a depressive episode, lots of people emerge on the other side and they've changed for the better. And, they've learned new tools, they've learned how to deal with things in a better way. And that phenomenon is described as post-traumatic growth. And it applies to any major life event, including grief, that challenges your emotional balance, your beliefs, and your personal narrative. And right now, if you were coming to this course because you were suffering in some way, the concept of adapting to your stress or your loss or traumatic event, let alone transforming your life in a positive way, might sound a bit too far-fetched. But if you follow the mindfulness practices that you learn here and that are in the other mindfulness courses in the membership, then you will experience breath by breath a very subtle but profound shift in your worldview, the way that you see the world. And the reality is that when you've worked through your grief or your stress, you won't be the same as you were before it, and you won't be the same as you are now, because you will have learned new things and you will have changed and grown. Changes in our lives will happen with or without mindfulness, and while we'd rather not perhaps have the stressful situations that we've got, or we'd rather have our loved ones back, or if it's a relationship breakdown that you're dealing with, you'd rather things to go back to the way that they were. Imagine that since you're probably feeling a high level of distress, it might be helpful to know that on the other side of grief, post-traumatic stress, you might experience the following benefits. So you might experience improved self-perception. So the way that you see yourself might have improved. You might gain a sense of strength, an inner strength. I think when you've had, whether it's a depressive episode or extreme anxiety or stress or dealt with grief and loss, and when you've got through it and come out the other side, a sense of strength develops in the sense of you've been through it once and you know that you can deal with it again. It might make you open to new possibilities. Often you get an improved level of compassion to yourself and to other people. And often coming through a stressful event can improve your relationships with other people as well. So I'm going to have a little bit of a look now on how to, so this learning, busting the myths of mindfulness and meditation is kind of like an entry point into meditation and mindfulness. And these 3 modules are aimed at helping you to understand meditation and understand the differences between mindfulness and meditation, and understand how to set yourself up for meditation practice, and give you a good foundation to lead into an 8-week mindfulness course, which you've also got access to. So over the next 8 weeks, if you go on to do the course, you'll be introduced to a new theme or a new concept in each module. And these are ideas. And these ideas will have a different theme to them. And along with those ideas will come a particular meditation. And that particular meditation is for you to practice whatever theme that you've learned that week. So for example, one week you may be learning to manage thoughts, and there'll be a taught session around managing thoughts, and that particular meditation that week will be practicing what you've learned, so that you can take that away. So it is suggested that you set aside about 20 minutes for meditations eventually, but starting off, even if you just start off with 10 minutes, then that will be really beneficial to you. Now, if you do the 8-week course, then about halfway through, there's a day-long retreat as well. So you might want to arrange a day off ahead of time if you'd like to attend the retreat. So feel free to move through the course module by module. In fact, that is the best way to do it. But you might want to go back and repeat some topics again, because sometimes we never take everything away the first time we do a course. There's quite a lot of concepts in a mindfulness course, and we never take them all away the first time. So the good thing with having it as a recorded version is you can revisit it as and when you need to. So throughout a mindfulness course, mindfulness and meditation teach you how to approach each moment with awareness and compassion. Guided relaxations help your body to benefit from the relaxation response, the calming nervous system, and that's going to restore your health and calm your mind as well. Also included in the course is gentle stretching in the form of mindful movement. And mindful movement helps you to increase flexibility, helps you to build strength, and it also helps you to feel more at home in your body. Now, quite often, we store our emotions in our bodies, and when our bodies start to feel uncomfortable, whether it's through bottled up emotions, pain, tension, we actually resist our bodies and we actually go away from them. So what a mindfulness practice can do is to help bring you back to your body and feel more at home with yourself, and that can really build self-worth and self-compassion. So you don't have to be a Buddhist, as I said, or even believe in the Buddha to benefit from any of these practices. And mindfulness doesn't require any sort of religion or beliefs. All it requires is practice, and you'll find something useful in each of the weekly practices. And my hope for you is that mindfulness will help you to return to a sense of balance, and balancing your bodily sensations, balancing your emotions. And in the 3rd module, we will be talking about how you can use your body as a refuge. And I refer to is when I have really, really stressful times, knowing that I've got these meditation practices to come back to, it's a sense of coming home to yourself. So even when on the outside life is really, really stressful, knowing that you can come back to the calmness of your inner self can really, really strengthen you and help you to get through the difficult times. So what can happen then is when you develop these practices and bring them into your lives, and you start to feel a sense of peace and calm, the next time that your world is uprooted, because it will, because that's just life, isn't it? You will know that you've got what it takes to not just survive, but to thrive through it as well. So think of mindfulness as a set of tools for everyday life. This is how I teach mindfulness. I am not a Buddhist. I don't have any particular religious beliefs, I teach mindfulness in the way that breathwork's intended, as a secular practice. So I teach it as a set of tools for everyday life. So I often refer to it as everyday mindfulness for everyday people. Now, but I also think it's worth knowing some of the background to mindfulness and how it's evolved from Buddhism is quite helpful to know and understand, I think. So as you've probably heard, mindfulness is associated with Buddhism and it's been around for thousands of years, but it's not a new phenomenon. Mindfulness and meditation has been in other religions before that, but it only arrived in the Western world around 1970. And over recent years, it's become more and more popular as a way to alleviate suffering, thanks to a gentleman who's often called the godfather of mindfulness, Jon Kabat-Zinn, along with some other people like Dr. Mark Williams, who wrote Finding Peace in a Frantic World, Sharon Salzberg, and some other teachers as well, who recognise that there must be something in the teachings of Buddhism, because monks and Buddhists are very peaceful and calm. Jon Kabat-Zinn and his colleagues started to think, well, there must be something, what is there that Buddhists and monks and some of these religions are practicing that help them to live this simple life and to be happy and all of those things. What is it that we could learn from them, that we could bring into the Western world to help us to manage this frantic pace of life? And it was Jon Kabat-Zinn then who developed what is now the Mindfulness for Stress course. So MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, along with Dr. Mark Williams and Sharon Salzberg, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, Mindfulness-Based Pain Management, as a way of packaging the teachings of Buddhism and mindfulness into a set of practical everyday life tools, and in a way that we can understand them and we can sort of take them into our lives and bring them into our lives as well. So I want you to take a little look at this and start to really understand what mindfulness actually is. So look at this picture. What is it? So it's a sky with birds. And essentially that's what mindfulness is. It's being able to see the sky and the bird with an equal amount of attention, but not wanting to change either one. So we can liken this to the sky being our mind. You may be familiar with the term blue sky mind or blue sky thinking. So imagine that your mind is blue sky and the bird is, you can liken that to just like thoughts coming in and flying past. And in mindfulness, it's learning to be able to see the sky and the bird. So your mind, observing what's going on in it, observing the thoughts coming in and then going back out with an equal amount of attention and not trying to hold on to one or push one away. And if we skillfully apply this principle of mindfulness to grief or stress or pain, what happens is we can observe the fullness of our experience, our heartache and our love and our fear and anger and gratitude for the friend with a casserole that shows up or whatever else shows up. So we might be in the middle of grief or middle of huge stresses, and with experiencing all those really, really uncomfortable emotions, and we can hold those, but then also acknowledge the good things that might happen as well, and the gratitude for somebody that shows up with a casserole or extending a hand of friendship or offering us some help. So we can hold both of those. It hasn't got to be one or the other, if that makes sense. And in our breathworks course, and in mindfulness, it's referred to becoming a bigger container. So when you're a bigger container, you're able to hold the comfortable emotions and the uncomfortable at the same time. And it means shifting from an either-or point of view to the inclusive state of and. So some teachers describe this as, okay, I'm feeling fearful, I'm feeling angry, and I'm feeling love for my friend, or I'm feeling angry and upset, but gratitude too, state of mind. And when you learn to make that gradual shift, you will be on your way to freeing yourself from what can feel like an endless cycle of suffering. And while pain will still exist, you'll come to learn that just like pleasure, suffering too is impermanent. It changes. It doesn't always stay the same. So instead of then fighting against reality, what we learn to do then is to embrace each moment with mindful acceptance rather than trying to change it in some way. And acceptance is quite a loaded word, and if it's used unskillfully, it can make us feel unseen, unheard and demoralised. So if you've ever been told to buck up or get over it, you know how that feels. And this kind of acceptance isn't only unhelpful, it can make us feel quite small as well. So acceptance in the mindful context means that even when the unthinkable happens, we're able to honour ourselves and our experience with dignity and kindness. So instead of turning our back on our own suffering and making ourselves suffer even more, we treat ourselves as we would a beloved friend. So we take the time to pay attention to the physical sensations, the thoughts and the feelings that come with our pain, instead of telling ourselves to buck up and get over it and that type of thing. And this kind of acceptance means that we choose thoughtfully how to respond. So we talked a little bit earlier about responding and reacting, and it helps us to temper our response with compassion. So instead of just reacting and critically and beating ourselves up, we're able to respond and hold ourselves kindly. We know that we don't need to numb our pain or run from our reality, nor do we need to punish ourselves through blame and guilt and self-loathing and a sense of unworthiness. And so all of these uncomfortable emotions that can make us feeling pretty rotten, can't it? So what we can learn to do is we can find a middle ground in open awareness, finding peace, just as the Buddha did in what's called the middle path. And we'll talk a little bit about the middle path a bit further on. And this is what mindfulness can do, is when we're able to walk the middle path, so not being caught up in the past or caught up in the future, but we're somewhere in the middle, in the present moment, that's when we can find peace. But before we dive into how you can practice mindfulness, it's worth having a little think about the teachings that brought these techniques to those of us who were not on a dedicated spiritual path. And it's worth understanding the teachings of the Buddha. So the first lesson from Buddhism is known as the Four Noble Truths, and it details the cause of suffering and gives us instructions for ending suffering. And the first noble truth acknowledges that pain or dukkha exists. We will all be disappointed, we will all experience loss, and we will all be unsatisfied at some point in our lives. Doesn't matter how hard we try to avoid it. So in short, we will encounter pain just as we encounter pleasure. And pain in this context might refer to an inevitable and uncontrollable event, such as the death of a loved one or an illness. There's nothing we can do about that. That you may have heard the phrase, that's what it is to be human. And that's what it is to be human. Being a human being means that we will encounter disappointments, loss, dissatisfaction somewhere along the line, and often at various points in our lives. The second noble truth says that suffering exists. The reason why we suffer is because we are attached to cravings, aversions, and a false sense of security. So suffering in this context is our reaction to pain, which is often unskillful. What we do is we hold on tightly to sensory pleasures, opinions and rituals, and the belief that everything is permanent, when in reality everything is actually fluid. Everything is actually changing. Our thoughts change, our emotions change, our bodily symptoms change. None of that is permanent, and this is what we learn in mindfulness as well. We get to learn that everything is always changing. Everything is fluid like the breath. But the third noble truth gives us some good news. The good news is we can end our suffering and we can achieve a state of peace. And it's in this state of peace that we'll feel untouched by the forces of greed and hatred and delusion, which are the root causes of suffering. And the fourth noble truth tells us that the way to end our suffering is through the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path, what that means is living our life with the right understanding, the right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness and right concentration. And the lesson is that it's neither self-indulgence or self-denial that leads us to peace. What leads us to peace is walking the middle path, which is mindfulness. So let's look at how the middle path and the Four Noble Truths can help us to walk through our stress, our grief or trauma, whatever it is we're dealing with. So when a loved one dies, you come face to face with the first noble truth, and that is pain exists. And it might not be, when we grieve, it isn't always about a loved one dying. It's any change or ending that happens in our lives. It could be a relationship breakdown, it could be job loss, it could be children leaving home, it could be diagnosed with a health condition. All of those situations cause us to experience grief or loss. So they will cause us some emotional pain. And you can realise then how temporary life is and recognise that at any moment, everything that we know to be true can suddenly change and suddenly fall apart. And it can feel like there's no ground beneath your feet. It can make us feel very, very shaky, unsettled and unsafe. And what happens then is some of us become really preoccupied with our loss, while others try to avoid thinking about it altogether by numbing their pain. And it might be through food, drugs, alcohol, oversleeping, over-exercising. There can be lots of different things. And this is the second noble truth in action. So the second noble truth comes from clinging, holding on to something, and aversion, sort of pushing it away, or being obsessed about something and obsessing and going over and over it, or completely avoiding something. And that's what can cause us to suffer. The third noble truth promises at the end of suffering, and that gives us hope in the face of great pain. It leads us to practices then that are offered in the fourth noble truth. And it's often said that if you follow one of the practices suggested in the Noble Eightfold Path, that the other seven will naturally show up in your life. And that's why we begin with right mindfulness. And when we practice right mindfulness, the others fall into place. And when the others fall into place, that's when you can flourish and thrive in your life. So we can see how, hopefully, just having I'm sure there's a lot. I said, I'm no Buddhist. I haven't studied Buddhism. I only know this basic information here. But I think it's fair to say that having that understanding can help us to understand, where mindfulness has actually come from. So even in the absence of grief, even in the absence of stress, even if you are coming to mindfulness and you're in an okay state, the practice of mindfulness can still seem quite daunting. And if you've ever picked up a magazine or been onto good old Dr. Google and you've seen pictures like this one here of a meditative model smiling with bliss on a beach, you'll know what I mean. And when we look at those pictures, it can give us some, which often happens with social media, doesn't it? We see pictures of lots of things, don't we? That gives us this image that it's easy and blissful, and the reality is it's not as easy as what it looks. And the truth is that a moment of mindfulness peace isn't as far away as you might think. And just having one moment of mindfulness peace can actually bring a sense of hope to the whole of your being. And all it takes is focusing in your attention on your breath and on your body. And mindfulness lets us expand our view by placing you in what we talked about earlier, the middle ground between either denying your pain or overindulging in your suffering. And it's from that vantage point, from that middle ground, you can learn to observe the whole of your experience with a sense of being open to whatever comes up. So what happens then is you stay in contact with the entire scope of your existence, and you experience grief, loss, stress, anxiety, depression without becoming those things themselves. You often will hear people, I'm stressed. You are not actually stressed. You're experiencing stress, but that's not the sum of who you are. I'm anxious, I'm depressed. And we can almost live up to those labels as well, can't we? You may be feeling depressed, you may be feeling anxious, but that isn't the sum total of who you are. The first step to practicing mindfulness is to understand that there's no right or wrong way to experience stress, to experience grief. Your reaction to these is determined by a number of factors. They're determined by your support networks, your learned coping strategies, your levels of resilience. There's many, many reasons behind why you cope with things the way that you do. Lots of people will experience uncomfortable physical sensations, particularly emotions and thoughts, and changed behaviours when they're suffering from extreme stress or anxiety or depression or grief and loss, but no two people are identical. What you might find if you are going through anything like that, you might find that your relationships increase in intimacy, or you might find that they dissolve completely. You might find that things that are said to you will either provide you with comfort or they might seem inadequate. But no matter what happens, if you learn to be mindful of your experience, you can learn to respond to it rather than just reacting. You can learn to be fully aware of your experience while embracing whatever arises within you with compassion and loving kindness. So, for example, you may be, I think one of the most stressful situations has been in debt and struggling with finances. You may be fully aware of your financial situation, but what you can do, and you may not be able to change that, but what you can do something with is the thoughts and the feelings and the bodily sensations that are arising. And instead of being really self-critical about them and beating yourself up about them, we can be compassionate and loving towards, and that can make the world a difference. And what it doesn't mean is, it doesn't mean that you have to be, it's not about being happy about your debt. What it means is, despite your loss, instead of feeling like you're fighting a losing battle against something you can't change, you observe the situation in order to develop wisdom and reduce your suffering. And believe me, I've been through many, many stressful situations, and the last year when I'm recording this has been particularly stressful, and being able to observe what was going on and deal with what was arising in me with compassion and loving kindness has made the world a difference. And it's meant that instead of in the past when I would have gone down and hit rock bottom or felt completely overwhelmed, yes, I felt stressed, but I've been able to manage that stress and to keep going. And that's the difference. So the Chinese symbol for mindfulness is a combination of the symbols now and heart, and that perfectly sums up mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of opening your heart to what is happening right now, being open to compassion and caring, holding the moment in a tender embrace rather than attacking that moment with hatred and violence. Often termed as calm abiding, or to be with whatever is happening. Mindfulness teaches us that we don't have to fix or label or judge whatever's arising, and in fact, most of the time, trying to fix the situation is useless. It doesn't help. And instead, we learn to respond to that situation without reacting, and that gives us an amazing amount of freedom, and that is what helps us to become unstuck. Now, we human beings, we are all born mindful and curious. But as we grow, we become influenced by others and our own experiences. Everything from how we potty train to what food we like is labelled either good or bad. And we stop noticing, or we stop being able to notice things just as they are. And instead we learn to make snap judgments on autopilot. And in that way, we start learning to chase after pleasures and push away everything else. We create a story of how things are supposed to be. We tell ourselves why we deserve or we don't deserve whatever's happening to us, when so often what's happening isn't actually personal at all. And unfortunately, most of us have become cut off from our true natures. We deny reality and we never feel that we're quite fully alive. And if we are living like that, then we're missing out on so much in life. And the death of a loved one often moves our autopilot switch to off, and it can be a wake-up call, a bell of awareness, or an opportunity to intentionally change course. And whether it's a death of a loved one or an ending of another situation, maybe moving house or changing career, changing jobs, retiring, hitting the menopause, at first you might feel numb, and that's normal, and that's the body's graceful way of helping you to cope in the early days of loss or the early days of stress. And eventually you realise that you need to reroute in some way, but you might not be sure where to begin. And this is where mindfulness can help. If you think of your life as a journey, the present moment is the you are here marker on the map, and it doesn't matter how disorientated you feel, your mindfulness practice will help to bring you back to that safe harbour of the present moment, using the tools you've already got, your breath and your body. And then you can make the choice to leave the autopilot switch set off and instead chart your own course and plot your own route. When we come to doing the meditation practices as well, you'll learn that when we're born, we breathe properly, we breathe deep into our bellies, which is the calming breaths, which trigger the calming nervous system. And deep breathing is often called baby breathing. And if you watch a baby when they breathe, you'll see that it's almost like they breathe with the whole of their body, and you can see the body rising and then falling away. Okay, I hope that has given you a little bit more of an understanding about where mindfulness has come from, and we're going to continue this now in module 2.